Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome to this session of the World Water Week, which is live this year. Some of us are in Stockholm, but many are in other places in the world. So welcome to this session that's going to deal with the governance framework that have been developed by a number of partners to strengthen urban wash governance. We have a session that is convened by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the SIPT University of India, and CIWI ourselves. My name is Alejandro Jimenez. I'm the director of the Water and Sanitation Department here at CIWI, and I will be part of this session together with a lot of other interesting speakers. But I will hand over to Professor Dinesh Mehta from SIPT University, who will be our master of ceremony and moderator throughout the session. Over to you, Dinesh.
Thank you, Alejandro, and welcome to all. This session is on governance, measuring wash governance. And as we all know, and many of us have struggled defining what governance is and identifying parameters that we can measure. Many agencies and institutions have done this for years. You can see in the announcement that we put some resources on what are those parameters. Our idea in this session is to look at an exercise that was done at the SIPT University and that has been continued for the last 10 years on what we refer to as the PAS, the Performance Assessment System, that is now has collected information of over 1,000 cities in India and for a long period of time. And so how have we added the governance framework that our partners CIWI and others have worked on? So this is the session where we are going to present the our first results. So the audience here is the recipient and you are going to witness this for the first time, and it's a work in progress. So your comments, suggestions are welcome. We have an eminent panel, and it's a really transnational, transcontinental panel. We have panelists sitting in Manila at the Asian Development Bank, Norio Saito, who is the director of the South Asia Urban Water Program at the Asian Development Bank. We are sitting in Ahmedabad, and my colleague Meera Mehta is another panelist who has worked on the past performance program. We have Mr. Robert Gakubia in Nairobi, who is the former regulator at WASREP, the Kenya Water Service Regulator, and he's been there. He set up that organization and was at the CEO at the helm for last 12 years. We have Vaida Duti, who is the country director of IRC, sitting in Accra. And last but not the least, we have Roshan Shrestha, who is the deputy director of WASH at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So we have a very esteemed panel, and we want to begin our presentation. We want to begin our session with presentations by Panchali Saika, who is the WASH program officer at CIWI, and Arwa Barmal, who is the program lead at the Center for Water Sanitation at SIPT. So I would hand over to Panchali right now for the presentation. Over to you, Panchali.
Professor Mehta, for your introduction. Hello, everyone. I'm Panchali, and before Arwa takes you through the details of the presentation, we would like to share the rationale and background behind why it is important to prioritize on water governance to improve the efficiency of water and sanitation services. Next slide, please. Cities globally are facing severe water crisis, and this is also noted in the context of India, both in terms of quantity of drinking water available and its quality, with 21 major cities in the country racing towards a depleting groundwater level. Drinking water is still supplied on an intermittent basis in most Indian cities, many receiving less than 4 hours per day. There is also wide disparity, inequalities in access to water and sanitation services, particularly if we look at urban slums. Next slide, please. To address these challenges and guarantee water and sanitation for all, one must recognize and see water and sanitation as a human right. This is because human right talks about quality of services that emphasizes not just on the availability, but also the physical accessibility, the affordability of services, as well as the quality, that is ensuring water provided are of good quality, is safe for human consumption, and sanitation facilities are safe to use, fecal waste is safely managed. And finally, also looking into the aspect of acceptability to ensure that water should be of an acceptable color, odor, and taste, and particularly looking into sanitation services, ensuring privacy and dignity, meeting the social and cultural standards of people they are meant to serve must be considered. But with this, equally important is to look into how the services are delivered, which needs to match the human rights principles, which are transparency, participation, accountability, equality and non-discrimination, and sustainability. Now, how do we really measure and monitor whether this is happening or not? These elements can only be assessed if we focus on governance of the water services. And improving the quality of governance processes of the water service provider will ultimately contribute to enhancing the overall WASH sectoral and system governance. Next slide, please. Now, when we talk of water governance, what do we actually mean by water governance? It is about who gets what water, when, and how. And it can often get complicated for practitioners, policymakers, service provider to apply this in practice. In the image on the left, we present to you this operational framework that CV has developed that provides guidance on how to apply water governance in practice across different areas, from water services to water resources to transboundary levels. Now, to assess and monitor the governance in the WASH sector, we must first look into and see whether the sector's core governance functions are in place or not. The core governance functions are key processes that are undertaken and established, say, by a line ministry, together with other stakeholders to develop and manage water services. This could include for the WASH services, like WASH-related policies and strategies, mechanism to coordination among all actors involved in the service delivery, from national to local government, different service providers and users. There are plans and preparedness measures, financing, management arrangement that could include service provision modalities, operation and maintenance arrangements, and then also looking into regulations, monitoring, and capacity development. But with the existence of these functions, what is also important is to look into and investigate how these functions are performed, how they are designed and implemented, whether in a participatory, inclusive, transparent, accountable manner or not, which is where the governance attributes, as you will see in the middle of the framework, are listed, are important to consider for the sector to achieve an intended and desired outcome and goal. For example, enabling environment for WASH services, resiliency, and sustainability. These governance attributes that are listed here reflects these human rights principles that I had talked about, and also the good governance and adaptive governance principles. Now let's see at the water service provider level. Now, in order to monitor the governance of WASH services in a city, one must consider and look into what falls under the mandate of the city's water service provider versus those that applies to the wider sectoral level that may come under the state and central government's responsibility. This is something we have considered while developing the different themes for the past governance framework and to adapt it to the context of the Indian cities. Now, although the application of the governance functions, which are coming under the state and the central government's responsibility, may vary depending on the context of the country and cities, it is important to ensure that, similar to the sectoral governance, the different governance functions performed by the service provider, like the ones listed here in the circle in the between that you see, contingency plan, customer management, etc., embeds the governance attributes. Thus, looking into this aspect will help monitor the quality of their key processes, looking into the accountability, transparency, efficiency aspect, and looking into whether this, ensuring that whether the service provider is moving into the right direction or not. For instance, if we see the service provider have clear, inclusive, pro-poor strategy by implementing pro-poor tariff system, including subsidies, if they have transparent procurement processes, and ensuring an accountable customer service and management mechanism with complaint and feedback system, then the trust on the service provider will increase, which is important to attract funding and enhance partnership in service delivery. And this will then ultimately help improve the quality of services in the long run. And this is what we are looking into the aspect in the framework, which becomes critical with the increasing pressure on the service provider in cities to be able to provide equitable, sustainable, and resilient services, and improving the efficiency and also transparency and accountability, which is why use of governance-based performance assessment system will become more and more relevant. I will now pass on to Arva to discuss more about the framework. Next slide, please. And this framework, just to share with you, has been developed, and Alejandro and Dinesh had mentioned, together by CV and Sivas under the WASH Governance Hub, which is an initiative and partnership developed together by these two organizations, along with the National Institute of Urban Affairs. Over to you, Arva, who will now show the pilot results that have been developed using the past existing database and those available in the public domain. Over to you, Arva. Thank you.
Thank you, Panchali. So I'll begin with a quick background of the past framework. Since 2005 in India, substantial investment has been made for urban infrastructure creation in WASH, but little has been known as to what is the service delivery and what is the outcome of this infrastructure. So on this very premise, the past framework was introduced. The framework is focused on three broad aspects of water, sanitation, and solid waste. The objective was to introduce it at scale. So initially it was implemented across all the 400 cities in the two major states of India. Since 2009, the PASS system has sustained and has scaled to over more than 1,000 cities in India. CWAS now is a repository of one of the largest urban data sets on urban water and sanitation, which covers 110 million urban population. So the entire system is based on a digital platform, which makes it very easy for governments to report data. So a task that initially took 2 to 3 days now takes only 2 to 3 hours to report on the portal. So over the 10 years of working with the local governments pertaining to WASH service delivery, we realized that although infrastructure services is important, it is equally important to focus on aspects of governance to improve the service delivery. So as part of our work on the Urban Governance Hub in partnership with CV, we focused on 6 of these themes on governance. So we initially began with a review of various governance frameworks such as the OECD, IRC, and others. And again, these were contextualized to India. So for example, policies and planning and implementation at local level in India is influenced by higher level policies. Implementation of WASH programs would require adequate, skilled, and inclusive human resource in the city government's administration. Adequate financial allocation and ensuring sustainable cost recovery is also very critical when it comes to infrastructure creation as well as sustainable service delivery. Regular monitoring of the service delivery and financial performance is needed to assess whether the city governments are working according to their mandate or not. ULBs now also need to take into account the environmental concerns by incorporating climate resilience practices into their functioning. They also need to accommodate on the social concerns by enhancing e-governance platforms and encouraging participatory governance. So in a way, all these 6 functions were translated to 60 indicators. Nearly half of them have been calculated using the past data set. And for the remaining indicators, we've used information which is available in the public domain. A governance index was generated based on the 60 indicators and was applied to 22 pilot cities in India. So now when one plots the urban governance index to the WASH service index, one sees that there is a positive correlation. So although there are, however, few outliers, our idea here is to demonstrate that this framework can be used for cities to assess their WASH governance. Here, performance of cities is presented, the colors suggest areas in which cities are doing better and areas where significant improvement is needed. Our preliminary WASH governance, the exercise here suggests that some very key lessons, like cities seem to do very well on aspects on accountability, monitoring, and community outreach. The reason is that there are a set of procedures for, say, local fund audits. Cities have very good complaint redressal mechanism. But on the other hand, one finds that adequacy, equity in financing is a major concern. There is lack of public consultation when it comes to WASH investments, and aspects on equity are not addressed. So in a way, strengthening the municipal finance and bringing in the equity dimension to it is an important aspect to be focused on. We intend to extend our analysis to more cities to test the robustness of this framework. We also intend to develop very simple tools which cities can use to assess their WASH governance performance. So we hope that such tools will help cities become well governed, and as they reach out to provide water and sanitation services to all, as it is envisaged in the Sustainable Development Goal 6. So thank you all for listening, and over to Dinesh sir for the panel discussion. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Arwa. Thank you, Panchali, for this excellent presentation. And rather than summarizing all these, I think you made a point that measuring service delivery performance is not enough. We need to also look at the governance aspect. And I'm going to turn to Mr. Roshan Shrestha, who is the Deputy Director at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, who have been supporting CEPT for the last 10 years in carrying out these activities. I'm sure they are pleased, because when we initially got the grant, we were asked, what is the sustainability of this? And it has grown from 400 cities to 1,200 cities now. But I want to ask Mr. Shrestha a specific question, that what do you see the past developing over time, and how do you see this governance aspect? And we understand that you are now also heading the city-wise inclusive sanitation program. And what do you see governance linked to sanitation as well as a part of this? So over to you, Roshanji.
Thanks, Dineshji. It was a really interesting journey and that we really went through since last more than a decade. I would say it's about 12 years. So when we established this partnership in 2009, we were hardly thinking that it can grow like that, and we will be really focusing on sanitation. Because that time when we started this work, even the foundation strategy was not clear. We were just developing our strategy, where we need to focus and how we need to move forward. And at that time, when this PASS system was established, then we also learned a lot. There are a lot of areas that we can understand from the field level, and how data system is going on in the country and in the city level, and how they are storing all those data in the city, and all those learning that we got from the past, that how really PASS team really systematize all the data and making digital format is very much impressive. And now we can see all this PASS system is really institutionalized by the national government. India has considered it as one of the tool, or one of the tool for the data management system in the entire sanitation portfolio, and integrated by the smart city and the city finance portal of Government of India also now going to integrate all these things. That's very much interesting. So I really congratulate CEPT and WASH team, CWASH team for this achievement. And when we talk about that during this 10-year journey, then that time Swachh Bharat Mission was not there, and CWASH was not there. All those things came in during this journey. And the work that what you did, the PASS or CEPT did, that was instrumental. Because of that, we were also working together for the Swachh Bharat Mission in Nepal. We were also one technical partner for the Government of India. then we used to talk to get all lesson from the SEP to provide our technical assistance. And then we very much focus also in Maharashtra, the way how Maharashtra achieved the open defecation free, and now moving towards ODF plus and all those things for managed wastewater and sanitation is also the all achievement what Maharashtra did was also, I would say, contribution of past project. This shape really is aligned there as well. And during that time, then we also started about 5 to 6 years back about citywide inclusive sanitation. That's also another journey we started. And during that journey also, we really get a lot of lessons from SHIP, why governance is really critical to achieve the goal. Because sustainable development goal, we are not really talking about access, we're talking about governance, we're talking about system change. And then the way how we come up with the CY framework, like the CY, citywide inclusive sanitation, is a public service approach to planning and implementing urban sanitation system to achieve outcomes, summarized by SDG 6.2. Where we say like safety, educate services and equitable services, as well as sustainable sanitation services for everyone is prime important, especially for the poor and marginal people and the women and girls. And to achieve that CY, for the success of CY also, governance is the key, because without the good governance, we can't really achieve that safety, educate and adequate and equitable sanitation services to the all. And we need to have responsible authority, we need to have accountability mechanism, and we also need to have resource planning and management. Our colleague just mentioned about the budget resource management is critical to achieve the goal. So all those things actually actually talk about the framework that actually the past has established, and all database system, how you have really come up with the instrumental for even the achievement of the CY's goal at the global level. So, but the learning what you did in the past, this quite long journey, that is right now, of course, it need to expand it in India, but at the same time, we also need to learn this to the other parts of the world, because this kind of system is not really established in other countries. And then by having all this framework like that, I'm very glad to see that how the NIUA, the SEP is working with the CV, NIUA to establish vast governance hub to support the city, local government, local authority, and the country is very much interesting. We are very much keen to partnering with the SEP for again next journey to expand the knowledge whatever you gain in India to other parts of the world. And we are very much looking forward to working with you, Dinesh and Miraji and entire Shiva's team. And I would like to congratulate once again for the success of this past journey for more than a decade. Thank you so much, all colleagues.
Thank you, Roshanji, for these very kind words, and also the fact that it is a versatile program to be able to be adapted and used for various things. Want to shift to a different continent now and want to request Vida. She is the country director of IRC. We understand, Vida, that IRC follows what they call systems approach, which is similar to what we call governance approach. So we would like you to elaborate a bit, and in the context of Ghana, how do you use that governance or systems framework, and what's your experience, and how do you see the work that you just saw presented be used in your own work? So please, Vida, go ahead.
Thank you, Dinesh. Yes, as I was following the presentation, I could see a lot of semblance in terms of what we've been doing in the application of the water systems approach. At IRC, we believe that to be able to provide safe, sustainable, equitable water services is predicated on having a strong water system. And what do we mean by a strong water system? A strong water system that is based on the foundations of good policies, regulations, good planning, finance, and our ability to learn to inform what we do. In Ghana, for example, we have an agreement with the government of Ghana to support the improvement of water systems. How have we done that? I'll give one example of the work and the stream of connecting from the local to the national level. So in one of the districts called the Stephen North District, we're working in partnership with the district and other Hilton Foundation grantees towards providing universal water services. In this partnership, IRC plays the hub role, providing capacity support to the district, supporting the district to sort out the planning, long-term planning, monitoring, and galvanizing participation of all stakeholders towards the agenda of universal services. As part of our role, we distill the learning from these processes, and we bring that to the national level to support in the improvement of the WASH policies. Recently, government is in the process of revising the WASH policies. So these learning feed into that. There's also ongoing processes to develop long-term planning for the sector. We also are part of that engagement to support that process. And then we are also supporting the National Development Planning Commission to review the guidelines and the frameworks for planning in the sector. There are also ongoing reforms to review how we have delivered water services in terms of the approaches. So we go through that cycle of bringing the learning from below and supporting the national processes. I must say that the success of this depends on aligning all these processes with government own priorities and government structure, and then putting government in the driving seat. I think that is the only way that we can firmly root all these governance processes to support the process. And so it's exciting to see how you are also applying these broad concepts in this performance management framework. Thank you.
Thank you, Vaida. And I think we'll come back to you in terms of how you think this indicator framework can be used. But we can now shift again back to Asian continent. I'm going to request Norio-san, who is the Director of South Asia Urban and Water Department at the Asian Development Bank. They are, I think, one of the major funders, or I would say, of water sanitation projects in Asia and in India also. So, Norio-san, how do you sort of see governance aspect in all your lending projects, and what do you see as a usefulness of a governance framework like this? Over to you, Norio-san.
Okay, thank you, Dinesh, for the questions. And it's my honor and pleasure to join this session today. So on the governance, I cannot stress enough on the importance of governance aspects. Governance is an essential and integral aspect in our lending. So in all ADB loans and grants we provide, we review very carefully, essentially all the aspects mentioned in the presentation: policy and regulation, finance, cost recovery, capacity development, institutional arrangements, among other things. So ADB's financing is not just for infrastructure development, but it's for establishing a system that enables sustainable service delivery. So let me just highlight maybe two examples from our recent ADB's engagement in India. So ADB just approved a new urban water supply project in Jharkhand, a low-income state in India. So in this project, the physical investments will be complemented with targeted institutional and financial reforms and capacity building, which includes like development of a sustainable water sector asset management strategy, introduction of volumetric tariff system, urban policy reform framework to strengthen also own source revenue generation, and training of relevant staff and awareness raising of beneficiaries on water conservation, health, and hygiene. And another state, Rajasthan, we have 20 years of partnership and which is, Rajasthan is the largest state in India, and ADB has been supporting urban water supply and sanitation service improvement. So ADB has supported the transformative reforms in Rajasthan, such as establishment of a corporatized entity to expand urban services and advance reforms, adoption of a wastewater policy, and establishment of a state urban governance training institute. We also have similar long-standing partnership with other states in India, such as Madhya Pradesh and Karnataka. And the key issues we are supporting includes like operation maintenance, cost recovery, and institutional strengthening. So going back to the presentation, this addition of the governance dimensions to the PAS framework is a highly necessary development in my view. A lot of improvements have been made in India in the water and sanitation sector, but still the successes are rather isolated. So we want to replicate or scale up this further. So a lot more needs to be done in improving governance. I quite agree on this initial assessments that alerts finance as a key area of concern. So in my view, this financial sustainability has to move in parallel with the service improvement, service level improvement, because if the quality access of the services improve, people are even willing to pay higher tariff. And this transparent monitoring system or framework will help benchmarking, which will benefit the states and urban local bodies. I hope good practices are also made available so that this framework will not only enable benchmarking or comparison among the cities, but other cities can learn from like successful cases, so that this can be further mainstreamed in India's urban and sanitation sector. Let me stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Noryo-san, for your excellent remarks, etc. And you talked about service delivery, and we want to move on to a person who has been regulating all the service providers in Kenya, and whether he used the stick approach as a regulator or whether he had carrots that provided support to the service providers. So Mr. Robert Gakubia, who has been at the helm of affairs as a water service regulator in Kenya for many years. So Robert, over to you.
Thank you very much, Dinesh, and thank you for having me. I think I was asked a specific question with regard to how governance-related aspects come in regulation of service providers, especially in their effort to mobilize funding. I want to say from the outset that there's a very thin line between regulation and governance. In fact, improving conditions that facilitate and enable service delivery and incentivize also sector growth is part of the regulator's mandate. For utilities to attract more financing, they must be creditworthy, meaning they must not only cover basic operation and maintenance costs, but they also have some money which is left to actually take care of their other infrastructural needs. Poor governance systems and poor execution of governance functions undermine this creditworthiness we are talking about. It is unfortunate, however, that traditional finance continues to flow to dysfunctional water service providers. And in my view and experience, this explains why there is a huge disconnect between expenditure, coverage, and financial sustainability. Funds and activities largely subsidize or perpetuate inefficiencies. Outcomes expected from the huge infrastructure that we are always talking about, these huge infrastructure developments, cannot be achieved or sustained if we ignore key governance aspects such as planning, strategy, coordination, capacity, and utility performance, just to name a few, which have actually been referred to in this framework by CEPT University. Even more importantly, it will be difficult to attract other sources of finance, especially from private sector, commercial finance, if the enabling conditions are unstable. We must, however, appreciate that as our sector will take some time to attract commercial finance, but we must ensure, and with this in mind, we must ensure that available public funding delivers value, which it cannot in a dysfunctional governance system. I was also asked to maybe comment on what I would have done differently now that I'm no longer the regulator, I'm just looking at things from the outside. I think I would have focused more on the planning, equity, efficiency, and the capabilities of development at the utility level. And this is a lesson learned among many other lessons that has been learned during this COVID-19 pandemic. Governments, I noted, in our system, there is a two-level system of government. Both national and subnational governments immediately turned to water utilities as the first line of defense to enhance services, despite the fact that historically support to them was only in rhetoric. My experience was also that support during the pandemic came slow and in bits and pieces, despite the flurry of emergency government directives. I also noted, at least in my context, that it can be frustrating spending a lot of time on the policies and strategies. In as much as they are crucial components of the sector development framework, the regulator feels just like a cog in a wheel. Therefore, with insight and to support focus at utility level, my engagement at policy level would focus on striking a balance. And the important thing here is striking a balance between the huge infrastructure development, which, as you know, is very popular at policy level, and utility performance, especially with respect to coverage, last mile, and equity. And we could see that at the height of the pandemic, you could see a utility being part of a huge infrastructure development, but they cannot address the basic needs to get water at that particular point for health and hygiene needs for people who are most vulnerable to the pandemic. So it's important to have this balance as you move forward in infrastructure development. It is also important to have the balance if you are going to do, for example, a tariff review in the absence of improving utility performance. Normally, it kind of you might actually lose the case if the services are not improving as you review the tariffs, which are actually needed critically for our in our situation. So with this balance, I believe we can maybe also focus on the resilience, especially to strengthen prospects for sustainable water services. I want to stop there at this point.
Thank you, Robert. And I think you really hit on the right, what I would call the aspects of governance that are important. And I want to move on to Meera and ask her that the government of India has recently announced this major program, what is the water mission, just as the success it achieved in the sanitation mission under Swachh Bharat mission. And now it aims to provide functional water tap in every house in the entire country. And within that framework, how do you think PAS will be effective or can be used, and how the governance aspects are important? So over to you, Meera. And she will use the same microphone. So please focus on her. Yeah.
And thanks for both
Go ahead.
the presentation as well as various remarks from the panelists earlier. I think the whole PAS approach that has been developed in India with the support of Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is a little bit path-breaking in a sense that we wanted to not do a few pilot cities here and there and show a very rigorous application of data collection and data management. But instead we said that we want to show that this is actually possible to do at scale. And only if you do it at scale, then it is possible to link this information, this analysis with the government's own programs and the other systems that they have. Dinesh asked me, how will this system support government programs? And I would say that it is not at the national level so much that this system can be used to support national government, but it can be used to a great extent at the state level and at the city level. State level, I would argue, as I said, that before we started this exercise in India, there had been a few benchmarking exercises by different institutions. but they were isolated. They did 20 cities all over India. They did one time, at the most somebody did twice, but there was no system that was all pervasive, in a sense that all cities in a given state or given province were covered, and that it did not sustain over a period of time. It was also something that was not often owned up by the local governments themselves and state governments themselves. And this, to our mind, was very important. So initial years, we actually took a long time to develop, but it is a system that is now being used by several states, as previous speakers have said, and it continues to be used and continues to be expanded. And for doing this, we had to engage, as Vaida also said, that you have to engage at all levels of government. So from city level, state level, or province, and the national government. But the system has, it is a system which is very robust. It's a digital system. There's an IT-based platform that has been developed through an industry academia partnership with a major leading company in India. And this is very important because it's something that has sustained over time. In terms of looking at governance, I also want to say that this information is actually used not only by governments certainly do use it, where Roshan referred to Maharashtra, where we are supporting for Swachh Bharat mission. And the system that we have, underpass, is actually being used extensively to support government's plans and development and so on, as well as monitoring whether services are actually being delivered. The system is in public domain, and therefore it also gets used by academia. It also gets used by financing institutions. ADB, for example, has actually used it when they make their visits to states to review their programs and so on, or to plan new programs. So this is, to our mind, very, very important. It's a robust system that has sustained and so on. In terms of looking at governance, there are various, and we've just initiated this thinking on how to incorporate more aspects of governance within the PASS system by looking at our own data, as well as Arva described, looking at other data that is available in the public domain. This then now can be used for a variety of purposes. Roshanji already referred to looking at CVIS, and CVIS obviously has one of the very important aspects is looking at governance aspect as well as inclusive service delivery. And we've now developed a framework whereby you look at CVIS type of governance aspects and use PASS to do that. And the kind of framework that Arva actually presented earlier, we have developed a similar framework for assessing CVIS performance across cities. And this is something that hopefully more and more can be taken up across. We also exploring other interesting things. Mr. Gakubia referred rightly to the, and Norio-san also referred to the need to mobilize additional funding and private funding or funding from the market, so to say. This is something that requires looking at whether the local government is creditworthy or not. So we are currently in the process of developing a process by looking at shadow credit rating of local governments. Credit rating by rating agencies is a very involved exercise and takes a long time, can happen only sometimes. Shadow rating can happen on a regular basis. We are also looking at, very interestingly, ESG. You must be all familiar with how corporate sector is now looking at ESG as a framework to really assess their own performance on various aspects, including on environment and governance. So this is a framework that we are currently in the process of developing. So in a way, what I'm hinting at is that this system that has now been developed, and because it has sustained over a period of time, it covers a large number of cities, it becomes possible to use it for a wide variety. And I want to stop with only one last thing on SDG, because this is something that we can actually use to measure SDG, at least 6.1 and 6.2. And this is important because then you actually, the whole talk of localizing SDGs is something that actually will become possible. And the sort of voluntary review of SDGs by local governments is something that we are hoping that we will support in the years to come. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Meera. And last but not the least, I'm going to turn to Alejandro Jimenez. Alejandro and his team at CV have been looking at governance framework globally. So Alejandro, what do you think in terms of from your global experience of using the governance framework in Latin America, in Africa? So what are the challenges that you see in implementing this monitoring framework? So WASH governance monitoring. Alejandro.
Yeah, thank you, Dinesh. And there have been so many interesting things said so far. I will try to be brief, but I would say that for me the main the challenge we have ahead of us, but a good challenge is then the use of the information system for improvement of the governance itself, right? So now we have an initial measurement. We are going to work into it, but then the next step is discussion with the service providers, with the cities, and then see what can we learn from it, what can be done, because the whole point of looking at governance has to do with improving the daily operations of the service providers. So that is what we are looking at, because sometimes when we look at the only at the outcomes of the service delivery, let's say the hours of connection per day or other indicators, it takes time to really make a tangible improvement there. So you have to then also work on what happens in between, right? And the daily, as I say, the daily aspects of utilities or service providers operation. And that's what governance help us very much to do. The other idea I would like to say is that I would also think that a key success factor is if we are able to make this governance discussion a positive one. And I think we are talking about improving governance is going to help improving trust, improving the finance in the long term, and that is exactly what we need to be doing. In the short term, there might be some inconveniences, right? So we will showcase or put a spotlight in, procurement processes are not sufficiently transparent, planning is not sufficiently good, there is not sufficient information to stakeholders, but this initial pressure is for a greater good, but not only for the citizens, but also for the service providers and the political leaders. And that is something that we have to be good at transmitting so that they get engaged, because not all the talk will be convenient at the beginning, but if we are able to create this accountability culture, and that is what is key for us, accountability, the culture of explaining, justifying what we are doing, both to users, citizens, consumers, as well as to peers, as well as to coordinate with the state, with other cities, with other sectors. That is going to make us be better prepared for service delivery and make good progress. So those would be my couple of points now. Over to you, Dinesh.
Thank you, Alejandro. And we've got a few questions from the audience, so I'm going to not be able to take all of them, but let me take a couple. And I think there is a question that is to both Meera and to Norio-san, but in a different way. To Norio-san, the question is, how does a funding agency like ADB take into account inclusion? And to Meera, does the PASS framework, what is the inclusion dimension in the PASS framework? So, or equity dimension in the PASS framework. So Norio-san, first you, and then Meera. Quickly, maybe 1 minute response so we can read the other questions.
Sorry, Dinesh, I missed the key point of your question because of the connection issue. So can you repeat the question again?
The question is, how does a funding agency like ADB refer to inclusion in its lending process? So what dimension of inclusion does it consider?
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, thank you for that. That's a very important question. And inclusion is another key aspect that we look into in the projects that we finance, because so normally we conduct some kind of impacts on the projects on the poor, so that poor can also benefit from the project. So in like water supply or sanitation project, instead of just supporting the core areas of the cities, we make sure that this inclusive service delivery aspect is incorporated in the project scope. Like this citywide inclusive sanitation, which ADB is also adopting, is one good example. In the past, some cities or some countries tended to prefer centralized wastewater management system, but we work with those cities or the states so that if the centralized system is too costly, we can suggest some on-site sanitation systems so that even the people in the low-income communities or peri-urban areas can benefit from the project that ADB finance. Thank you.
Thank you. Meera?
Yeah, just to maybe a couple of quick points. One is we have included or we've addressed the issues of equity by looking at service provision in slums separately. So city as a whole and service delivery in slums as a separate area. And this actually throws up very interesting analysis at times. The second is similar to what Norio San was saying. So we've added particularly the dimension of on-site sanitation. So earlier, the Government of India framework looked at only sewerage for sanitation related indicators, but we've added the aspect of on-site sanitation because a large number of population, particularly the poorer population, actually depends on that. So those are, but slums as a separate service delivery, how does it differ? What are, and the policies related to that? These are the aspects.
Okay, thank you. And there is a question, Roshanji, maybe it is addressed to you, but it's general question, but I'm going to ask you that how do organizations like BMGF prepare countries or subnational entities to meet with, become resilient? We've just gone through a pandemic, at least in India, through major second wave. We're now, the IPCC report is talking about major climate changes that will have an impact on water and sanitation services. So what does the foundation do? I mean, this is from me, but general question is, what does one need to do in terms of WASH, service delivery and governance to prepare service providers for this or become resilient? Roshanji.
Yeah, this is very true because I'm just giving you one example, two examples. I was in the last vacation 1 week back, I was in California. There I saw the problem of the lake drying up. It is the big lake that where I was visited is Lake Folsom, where 36% capacity is in running, and then all downstream there's no water, it's dried up, all environment is totally, all the community getting suffered. So problem I have seen that. Similarly, I have also seen the problem now in my home country, Nepal, because we have the one large project like the Melamchi water supply project supported from ADB just washed out after 30 years of waiting, and now because of one flash rain, the wash out all intake, then there's no water now after 30 years of waiting. So that means, this is not only the issue of the supply and demand and so on. This is more issue of the governance as well as community engagement and making the people aware about what may happen now in future. So that's why the data, all those generation that what you have really developed, that is very much critical, and those data need to be very much transparent. And when this kind of things happen, what are other alternatives? So what are the other sources that we need to tackle? Same thing goes to sanitation. Now we have all the seashore area, everything is polluted. So how can we manage that? And all those things need to be aware by the people. And this is the framework, governance framework, that what you have developed is also that you have addressed about the community engagement. So that's why each and every person need to realize that what's going on. And it need to be speak by data. That's why we are very much interested on the resilience program, data-driven program, and that's why we are supporting this, and we'll be continuously working with the government, different government, and as well as development partner. We're working with UNICEF, UN Habitat, as well as all the development bank to work together to bring this data issue in front, so that we'll have the better awareness at different level.
Thank you, Roshanji. We are running out of time, so quick comments, Vida, and there is some in the chat. There is a reference to the agenda for change of IRC, and it seems that the framework presented is quite similar. So maybe a quick 1 minute remark on how do you see that in your own perspective, Vida?
So I think for agenda for change, the thing I want to talk about is the fact that for these things to work, we need to work in partnership as partners in development and support a common agenda to be able to achieve that. Specifically on the framework and responding a bit to the challenge that was raised by Alejandro, I think that for such a framework to be sustained beyond the project lifetime, we need to see how we align it with government's own performance requirements. Most of our utilities have organizations that set performance framework. So how do we ensure that this responds to that? By having those aligned, they get motivated to take the remedial actions to respond to the issues that may arise. Otherwise, it is seen as a huge system sitting somewhere. And then they also have their own system. So we need to ensure that there's that alignment. And that is what will take us beyond a project that is huge for the improvement in the performance of delivery. So that's the point I want to make on this. Thank you.
Thank you. Robert, some chat box is saying there's an organization that has developed corruption risk index, and in your own experience as a regulator, how do you relate to corruption and is there a measure, or was there any way that you attempted to do that? Quick response.
Thank you very much. I think I would look at it from the way Alejandro just said. It is time that we looked at governance with a positive perspective. In my context, sometimes when you talk about governance, you are just being told that is another name for corruption. And I don't think that advances the cause. So it is important that we actually use it as a positive and try to advance the trust. We have always had these risk assessments, all that, and we even monitor the water utilities every year for governance indicator. And I think this is how we have decided to address it, because every time you talk so much about corruption, then you lose almost everybody, because it's like there is an implication that you're actually dealing with corruption. The regulator is not an anti-corruption agency, and I think we should be able to be doing it, trying to improve services from with a positive mindset rather than just with corruption. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. And now we are just, I think, closing time. So I'm going to give the word to Alejandro, both reflection on the session as well as your closing remarks, and we'll probably close with that. So Alejandro, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Dinesh, and thank you everyone from both the speakers as well as the participants with the lively questions and comments. From my side, I just want to say that I'm glad to have seen the reactions of the governance aspects being highly relevant, highly valuable, and at a nice time, to try to make this pass, which is already an established tool, to add an additional feature to it that can help the stakeholders work with the service providers, with the citizens, and with state level, etc., to improve service delivery. So we are proud of have been part of that, and we hope to continue the implementation now with this very good partnership under the WASH Governance Hub in India and with CEPT. And yeah, just to say that the fact that we have done some good steps, it's just the start of the journey for then making the change, some additional changes in then the governance aspects. So bringing that topic to the table of city service providers to see what can be done better and how can this help two things. First, to improve the quality of service faster, and secondly, to sustain the achievements that have been already gotten in the last few years, right? And so that is very important, and not least to bear in mind the climate aspects, the crisis aspects, and that is something where governance, increased trust, coordination, accountability have proved to be critical for an effective response. So I think we have a lot of work ahead. Thank you all for being here. Thanks for CEPT for this session and partnership, as well as to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And we hope to continue in the future working together. Thanks, everyone. And I hope you have a nice next session in the Water Week. Bye.
Thank you all. Thank you all. Bye-bye. And thank you all, panelists and
Thank you.
presenters. Bye.
Thank you very much. Bye.